me. Good.
Yeah.
I look forward to revisiting it.
Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Hey, gang.
It feels like I haven't seen anybody in like, months. It's only been 2 weeks, but it feels forever.
True.
It did. It's like a long time. It felt like a long time. Doug, is that a new background?
It is.
You keep finding them good.
Look at the kitchen. This is a pretty good one.
You're soon going to have less time to look for backgrounds.
It's true.
Morning.
Good morning, Mark.
Morning.
Mark has a new backdrop as well.
I think those are his pictures. Mine are from Google.
Yes,
Where-
I decided
where
to
is-
rotate it. This is, I think, Hell's Canyon. I did borrow it from ADOT, so I will say credit to their Flickr account.
Shouldn't have given that away.
Yeah, you had permission, yes? It was, appropriate because you're in public.
Who knows? Beg for forgiveness, right?
Hey, you're advertising ADOT, so
Well, their Flickr account's open. Right?
There you go. How's that? Google to the rescue. I'm floating.
I like the other one.
I know that looks like psychedelic or something.
I like the other one.
Go back. Go back.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody joining us. I see another beautiful backdrop from our demographer, but we'll ask what that backdrop is later. I think we have everybody online. Director, is council ready to go? Director Schmidt, you ready to go?
I think we are just waiting on Eric to come back from the kitchen and Roy to step into the room, and then we'll be ready, Chairwoman.
Okay, you got it. Okay, are we good to go? I saw some people walk in, but your box is very small.
Yes, I think we're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, everybody. We'll dive right in. Agenda item number 1A, call for quorum. It is 8:01 a.m. on Tuesday, September 14th, 2021. I call this meeting of the Independent Redistricting Commission to order. For the record, the Executive Assistant Valerie Newman will be taking roll. When your name is called, please indicate you are present. If you're unable to respond verbally, we ask that you please type your name. Val.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vice Chair Watchman,
Present.
Commissioner Lerner,
Present.
Commissioner Meal,
Present?
Commissioner York,
Present.
Chairperson Newberg.
Present.
And for the record, we also have in attendance Executive Director Brian Schmidt, Deputy Director Lori Van Haren, Public Information Officer Michelle Crank, Community Outreach Coordinators Marie Chappell and Alex Pena. Our legal team, we have Brett Johnson and Eric Spencer from Snell and Welmer. We've got Roy Herrera, Jillian Andrews, and Daniel Arellano, from Ballard Spar. Our mapping consultants, we've got Mark Flahan, Brian Kingery from Timmins, got Doug Johnson and Ivy Beller-Sikansky from NDC Research. We also have a special guest, Dr. Jim Chang, the Arizona demographer. We possibly will have Dr. John Walsh from the president of the Arizona Library Association. I do not see him online yet. And then Debbie Wilkes is our transcriptionist today. And that is everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We have a full group. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Please note for the minutes, a quorum is present. Agenda item 1B, call for notice. Val, was the notice and agenda for the commission meeting properly posted 48 hours in advance of today's meeting?
Yes, it was, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, approval of minutes from August 31st, 2021, 2 weeks ago. We have 2A general session. We did not have an executive session. Do I have any discussion on the minutes from August 31st? If there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion to approve the general session minutes from August 31st, 2021.
Madam Chair, Vice Chair Watchman moves to approve the general session minutes of August 31.
Do I have a second?
Commissioner York seconds.
Commissioner York seconds. Any further discussion? With that, we'll do a vote. Vice Chair Watchman.
Aye.
Commissioner Meal.
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner.
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye, and with that, the minutes are approved from August 31st. Thank you very much, Val and team. We'll move to agenda item number 3, opportunity for public comments. Public comment will now open for a minimum of 30 minutes and remain open until the adjournment of the meeting. Comments will only be accepted electronically in writing on the link provided in the notice and agenda for this public meeting and will be limited to 3,000 characters. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. We move to agenda item number 4, discussion on public comments received prior to today's meeting. And I open it up to my colleagues. If there's no, I think the silence is that the comments were very focused on material 2 weeks ago, and so much of it has been resolved through the public training that occurred yesterday, and et cetera. The only things that I would add, there was a comment that touched upon, again, the way in which, and I believe it may have been directed to me personally, but the way in which we are seeing the 6 criteria of the constitutional, requirements, and where competitiveness falls within those criteria. The one message or comment that I have on that as we, are about to embark on robust public hearings and serious debate and dialogue on this is all 6 criteria are going to be thoroughly considered and evaluated. We've received great training from our council. The commissioners have some degree of discretion in our interpretation of the order of these criteria. All of them will be considered thoroughly. When you're making your case and want us to understand your community and what your needs are, to the extent that you can incorporate as many of the criteria as possible, that only makes your case a little stronger and makes it a little less ambiguous for the commissioners. So my simple direction is, as you're giving us feedback, the more thorough you can be addressing all 6 criteria, I think empowers your case. And the other comment is on the budget, and I think we'll dive in a little more deeply as things trickle in and we can identify those specific areas. And if there's no other specific comments on public comments, I'd like to thank the public as always. I hope the mapping team, when they dive into their data, give a huge shout out to Arizona for our general responsiveness and interest in the redistricting process. We're blowing other states away in terms of submitting community of interest reports, at least the neighboring state to the west of us. And thank you. I mean, thank you to our team. Thank you to mapping. Thank you to the public for engaging. But hopefully we'll get into that a little more later. Any other conversation? Okay. Agenda item number 5. Thank you so much, Dr. Chang, for once again joining us. We have the state demographer's presentation to help us understand our population.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for inviting me again to speak to this important commission. And thank you all commissioners for your attention. And the request, I think, was to discuss racial and ethnic demographics and concentration. I think everybody knows the word ethnicity, but I think before I start, I want to just get into it and get a clarification. And sometimes when we talk about ethnicity, we are talking about, I'm Chinese, you are Italian, and he is Mexican. So sometimes those ethnicity means that. But in the context of the redistricting data, the Census Bureau used the word ethnicity interchangeably with the phrase Hispanic or Latino origin. So in today's presentation, I'm going to use it that way. So when I say ethnicity, I'm talking about Hispanic origin. So I just want to make that clear. Let me fire up my presentation, and I will share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. Okay, now I cannot see you anymore, so I'm just looking at my presentation. So like you see in the title, I actually said race and Hispanic origin, but throughout my presentation, I'll be using both Hispanic origin and ethnicity. Also, before I get started, I'm a state demographer working for the Arizona Office of Economic Opportunity. We're also part of the Arizona Commerce Authority. just to make sure my agency, my employer, did not tell me what to say. They did not tell me what not to say. So anything that I say, anything that I present here is solely my, if there is any opinion that I express, that will be mine, not that of the Office of Economic Opportunity or the Arizona Commerce Authority. Okay, since we're talking about race and ethnicity, let's just start with how the Census Bureau measure these concepts. At the bottom, that's the time. That's the time of all the censuses. They started from 1790. That's the first census, all the way to the most recent census for 2020. On the right, you'll see all these race groups in the Hispanic origin. If you see a block in this graph, that means that concept was measured for that census. Just to start from the most recent one, every race concept is measured. But if you go all the way to the left, we can see that we only had, see, this is black. I don't know, hopefully you can see my cursor. Black or African American, that race has been measured throughout history for all the censuses. So was white. But all these other categories, they were measured for some censuses, but not all of them. But if you look at Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, that started in 1960. And for Hispanic origin, they started back in 1930, but they kind of stopped it and then picked it up again in 1970. And for Asian, it started in 1860. So these are measured differently. Also, even though it's measured, it's the question almost always changed from decade to decade. Let's go to the live website of the Census Bureau on this one, just to have a quick look. So this is the same thing, but this is live. If you, I'll just put my my cursor over some of the boxes, and it's going to bring some additional information. Here, this is back in 1790. This is how they measured Black African American, but they, at that time it was not called that way. It was, if you look at the top of my screen, it's slaves, and it was that way for a few decades, and then in 1820, it's slaves or free colored persons. And if you look at white here, it's free white female and males. And again, for the 1800 census, it's also free white female and male. This reminds me our society has come a long way. Back in the beginning, they cared to ask a white person whether they're male or female, but for a Black person, for a slave, they did not even care to ask male or female. And okay, so that's a very quick overview. Reminds us of some different times. Okay, back to my presentation. Let's move on to the next slide. This slide is a comparison of the race and Hispanic origin questions between the 2010 census and the 2020 census. In both censuses, to the left, that's the one sheet, question 8 and question 9, that's the 2010 census. And if you look at the right two, questions 8 and 9, that's 2020 census. We're not going to spend all our time reading all the details, but one thing to note is for both questions, for both censuses, we had two questions. One is this person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And in 2020, this is worded the same. And then you can write in. And the one thing to note is back in 2010, you can only write in, for all these write-in options, you can only write in 30 characters. If you write more, they only capture 30 characters. See, look, you don't have 30 boxes here, but you did not have to respect these boxes. You can write more than this, but when they captured and coded your information, they only took the first 30 characters. For 2020, they allowed write-in of 200 characters. And well, you might say, well, there was no space for me to write in 200 characters in each of these questions. Remember, we did it online, so so people did have, most of the people did it online, so most people did have that space to write 200 characters. And even here, you are allowed to just write as much as you want, and the Census Bureau captured 200 characters. Just pay attention to the text in the middle here. This is a quote from the Census Bureau blog. It says, the improvement and changes from 2010 to 2020 enabled a more thorough and accurate depiction of how people self-identify, yielding a more accurate portrait of how people report their Hispanic origin and race. And then another paragraph, differences in overall racial distribution are largely due to improvements in the design of two separate questions for race data collection and processing, as well as some demographic change over the past 10 years. Well, this is, to me, this says something, but it's not extremely helpful. It's basically saying, if you see change from 2010 to 2020, it can be due to the change in the questionnaire design. And the Census Bureau says they improved it, they become more accurate. But it can also be due to real change. So, but how much you can attribute to real change, how much is due to the questionnaire design, it's difficult to disentangle that. And I'm sure this is going to be the subject of study for scholars for years to come. So this is not something that we're trying to tackle today. We're not going to have an answer, but I just want you to be aware that if you see changes, wow, 100% increase. So just know that in actuality, you may not have had 100% increase. It may have been due to how the questions are asked and how they are coded. So with that, let's just look at some data. This is at the state and county level. We started with 2010 data to get some baseline for the decade. So this is 2010 race and Hispanic origin as a percent of total population. So we're talking about proportions. So the first column, the first data column is the total population. Those are numbers. I think everybody is now familiar that back in 2010, our population was 6.39 million. And of that, just under 30% were Hispanic or Latino. That's 29.6%. And then you have white alone, not Hispanic origin, and that's 57.8%. And then the rest of the groups are quite small. We have Black or American or African American, that's 3.7%. All of these race groups, they are not Hispanic or Latino. So I just want to make sure, because if you talk about the race, you could be talking about Black of both Hispanic origin and not of Hispanic origin. But in here, we're specifically talking about each race group that's not Hispanic or Latino. We have included the Hispanic or Latino of any race in this column, in this second data column. Okay, so then we have American Indian, that's 4%, and Asian alone here. Note that this might be different than the other categories you've seen. We have combined Asian alone and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, because each of these groups were pretty small, very small. Even combining them is still small. And if you have a need to separate them, there is data for that purpose. But for today's presentation, they are combined. And the last column is some other race alone, or two or more races, not Hispanic or Latino. Again, this is the combination of several categories. We have some other race and then two or more races. If for some reason you want two races, three races, 4 races, there is a way to separate them, but for today's presentation, they are combined. Okay, that's 2010. For 2020, the layout is the same. So if you look at the Hispanic or Latino population for the state, it's, I think we said just under 30%. Now it's just over 30%. There is an increase of 1 percentage point from 29.6% to 30.7%. And then, okay, we'll take a look at the comparison later. But if you want to have a quick glance of the data for all these counties, so we can see, Apache County, Hispanic or Latino, that's 5.8%. That's pretty low compared to the state. That's not surprising. And if you look at American Indian or Alaska Native, that's 70%. That, Apache County, because that's where the Navajo Nation is, has a very high concentration of American Indians. So, and if you look at some other county, Yuma County, so that's 63%, 63.8% Hispanic or Latino. And Santa Cruz, 83%. That's the highest, that's the county with the highest percentage of Latino or Hispanics. Okay. Now, this slide presents the 2010 to 2020 % change in population by race and Hispanic origin. For the entire state, the total population changed 11.9%. That, we know this for a while now. And the Hispanic population increased 15.7%. The white alone or not Hispanic population increased 3.3%. So for this, at the state level, all these groups saw increase, but the level of growth varied quite significantly. And the highest increase is some other race or 2 or more races. That's the one I was telling you. Don't be wowed too quickly. This is 142%. Most of that is probably due to the changes they made to the questionnaire design. Some of that might, probably is the real increase. But at this point, it's almost impossible to separate them out. Okay, and you can see for all these counties, there was some really large growth. Like for Greene County, this changed 334%. For Greene County, this might be it might have more of a real growth because the population grew a lot, and the characteristics of the population also changed quite a lot. So, okay, see if there is anything that jumps at you. There are some kind of surprises. We have 5 counties that lost population: Apache, Cochise, Gila, La Paz. That's a very significant loss, almost 20%, and also in Navajo County. Okay, I want to show you this one. This also measures change, but it uses a different metric. The title says 2010 to 2020 percentage point change in race and Hispanic origin as a % of total population. That's a mouthful, but let's just look at one example. At the state level, remember we look at the 2010, Hispanic population was 29.6%. And in 2020, the Hispanic population was 30.7% of the total population. If you take those 2 percentages, you'll find the difference. The difference is you'll say it was 1.1, right? But because of rounding, it's actually closer to 1.0. So that's the percentage point change from 2010 to 2020. So this is how you interpret all these other numbers on this table. So the white alone, not Hispanic population, their proportion of the population actually decreased by 4.4 percentage point. So for African American, that increased is 0.7 percentage point. American Indian, it's also a decrease of 0.3 percentage point. Asian and Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, that's an increase of 0.8%. So these numbers, they all look small, but if you compare to the previous slide, so even some looks like even significant changes, like the Hispanic population, 15.7%. That's the census over census change. When you look at the percentage point change, it's it looks small. So just to give you a couple of different perspectives to look at this data. And finally, we just take a look at the numbers. This is 2020 population by race and Hispanic origin. I'm not going to say much here. Just if there is an area you're really particularly interested, just have a quick look. Like in Apache County, there are 335 Asian or Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. So it's a small population. And if you look at Santa Cruz, we have a population of 47,000 and a full 39,000, almost 40,000 is Hispanic. So, okay, so those are the tables. I wanted to let you know that our office has published similar information for the following geographies. We have incorporated places, that's cities and towns like Phoenix, Tucson, Chandler, Snowflake, these places, and also census designated places. These are not incorporated, but locally they're recognized as population centers. So we have data for these places. We also have this for Native American reservations or tribes, and we also have this for school districts. And in addition to these tables, we also have compiled the 2020 block level data that includes even more variables. So the data can be easily aggregated to the block group level, to the census tract level, and to the county level. Let me just show you really quickly where they are. This is our website that publishes the 2010 census data. The website is not fancy, just have some downloadable tables. And this is the state and county. You open it up. These are the numbers that we just looked at. So this is the simple table. And we have the same thing for, again, incorporated places and all these others. So if you want to further study this, and feel free to download any or all of these tables. And then we have these data sets. I said we included a lot more variables. Let me just show you quickly. This is, I just downloaded the Apache county blocks, and all these other counties are structured the same. So these are the variables that we included. The summary level, the county, let's skip the geographies here. These are the population variables. We included total population, population of one race, and white, black, and all of these. And then the second block is the total population by Hispanic origin. So you have total population, and then you have the Hispanic or not Hispanic or Latino. And then next you have not Hispanic, and then after that you have total population of one race, and below that it's different races. You see the hierarchy. First total, and then Hispanic, and then not Hispanic. Under not Hispanic, you have population of one race and population of two or more races here, and then below population of one race, you have white, black, American Indian, Asian, Native American, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, and some other race. So just when you use this table, pay attention to the hierarchy. This is the actual data table. Again, this is at the block level. I said you can aggregate them. Let me just show you. You can do this like in less than 1 minute. You can get all these other levels. let's say we want to track data. Let's say we want total population. We want the Hispanic population. We want white, Black, Native American, Asian, Pacific Island, other, and 2 or more. So now you get your census tract level data for all these different race groups. I'm doing this because I remember what these variables stand for, but you can refer to this easily and find out what these are. So now you have, excuse me. Now you have this at the census level, at the census tract level. And if you want block group, just add block group to it, and you'll have all this data for the block group. So feel free to download these data sets and play with it. Okay, let's get out of this, back to the presentation. I want to talk about the concept of racial and ethnic diversity. The Census Bureau has been using separate different measures to measure this. One is the diversity index. The diversity index is interpreted as the probability that 2 people choosing at random will be from different race and ethnic group. And this is the formula they use. The diversity index is equal to 1 minus the sum of all these different race group proportion. That's the proportion. This is the Hispanic. Let's see if the Hispanic, like in Arizona, Hispanic is 30.7%. So this H will be 0.307 squared plus white. White is around 54. That would be 0.54 squared, and so on and so forth. This is AIAN, American Indian or American Indian or Alaska Native, and the Asian. This is Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and this is some other race, and then multi-race. So this gives you a number, and they interpret it as this. And then another way of measuring racial and ethnic diversity is the prevalence rank, using prevalence rankings, the percentage of the population that falls into the largest racial and ethnic group, the second largest group, the third largest group. And then there is something else called the diffusion score, the percent of the population that is not in the first, second, or third largest racial ethnic groups combined. Let's just go back, take a real quick look. Like in this one, I'm going to show you when I demo the tool. Okay. So I am going to open this tool the Census Bureau made. This is the diversity index for the United States and for the states. The United States has a diversity index of 61.1%. Or, it's basically the more technical number would be 0.611. But in order to, for us to understand this a little bit easier, they use a percentage. They use a percent, but it's the same thing. So, and that number is the result of all these percentages plugged into that formula that I showed you previously. And if you look at Arizona right here, Arizona is 61.5%. That's slightly larger, slightly higher than the United States. We rank 13th out of 51. I think 51 includes DC. So the diversity index is pretty high in Arizona. That's 2010. If we can have a quick look of that was 2020. And I just clicked on 2010. So back in 2010, Arizona was 57.4. And we ranked 12th out of all the states and DC. So our diversity index increased, but it did not increase as fast as most other states. So our ranking actually slipped slightly. Okay. Let's look at the counties, and I'll change this into 2020. I'll request Arizona counties. So this shows the diversity index of each of the counties. The highest is Coconino County. If you look at this, I think one reason is it has a pretty high presence of the white population, it's the black, it's the American Indian or Alaska Native, and the Hispanic or Latino. And then the next is Navajo. If you look at the details, Navajo, you have white and American Indian, and Hispanic or Latino also. So this is the ranking, and the Santa Cruz is actually the least diverse. If you remember, more than 80%, or is that 83 or percent, or 86%? I don't remember exactly. Is Hispanic. So that county is the least diverse. Okay, so that's the diversity index. Now, next, let's look at the race and ethnicity prevalence ranking. What do they mean by this? So they wanted to see what's the largest group for each geography. Here we start from the United States and all the states. You can see on the top, this is the legend for, each color represents a racial or ethnic group. So white is this orange color, and black is this light blue color, so on and so forth. And the last one, Hispanic or Latino, is this green color. So for most of the United States, you can see that the white non-Hispanic population is the largest ethnic or racial group. And that is also true for Arizona, right here, 53.4%. For the United States, it's almost 58%. Here, this is the second largest racial or ethnic group. Now we're getting more diverse. We're seeing different racial and ethnic groups represented in this one. And for Arizona, obviously, it's Hispanic. And for Alabama, that's black. And for the United States, it's also Hispanic. The third largest racial group for Arizona, it's black or African American. And let's just quickly switch to 2010. Okay, so for 2010, back in for Arizona, white is the largest group, and the Hispanic was the second largest group. But for the third group, it was African American. I'm sorry, it's American Indian. So that has changed to black or African American. And now let's look at. Let's see, that's it. Unique counties. Okay, yeah, we can look at the counties. For our 15 counties, 11 of them have white as the largest racial group. And Apache County, Navajo County, Santa Cruz, and the Yuma counties, they have different, they are either Native American or Hispanic. So this is the concept of prevalence ranking. And then you have the ethnicity, race ethnicity prevalence maps. It's the same concept, but it's mapped in here. And let me zoom in. I don't think you can select a state here, but we can zoom in. Excuse me. We can zoom in to Arizona. This is the largest racial or ethnic group. Again, we see mostly white But Apache and Navajo, that's Native American or American Indian in here, and Yuma and Santa Cruz, that's Hispanic. That's the largest group. And here you can select to see which is the second largest group for our counties. So you can see mostly it's Hispanic or Latino, right? And but for Navajo and Apache, that's white. And for Yuma and the Santa Cruz, that's also white. And for Coconino, that's American Indian. Okay, and the third largest group, give it a second. Yeah, and so mostly 2 or more races. And we also have Hispanic or Latino in the northern counties. Okay, so that's the measure of racial diversity. And if you want the data, you can download the data tables from here. And you can select Arizona and select any county you want. And look at these details. Okay, let's move on back to the presentation. So with those maps, we were able to drill down to the county level, but I'm sure you are interested in more in the smaller geographies. So this tool provided by ArcGIS by Esri, allows you to do just that. I'm going to get into this live map. But this is not a Census Bureau tool, so it's a third party. Well, when you go there, it takes you directly to the DC area. So let's zoom out of there and get to Arizona. In here, there are several maps. What we are interested today is the predominant race and ethnicity map. Again, this is a different provider, and they're using different legends. So if you just remembered what color means what, well, that doesn't apply anymore. These are different color schemes. Take a moment to orient yourself and take a look at the legend to the left and what color means what. Now we are in Arizona. So this map shows which race or ethnicity is the predominant category in each county. And it also shows the level of the degree of predominance. Like in both Apache County and Navajo County, the predominant race is American Indian. So you can see on the left, the green color is American Indian. But how deep the color is also indicates the strength of predominance. In Apache County, it's more, the predominance of American Indian is higher than in Navajo County. And you can see for most of the other counties, the predominant race is white. And we can see Yavapai County is more white than, say, Maricopa County. So this is how you interpret these maps. And in Nogales, this is Santa Cruz County, is more Hispanic than Yuma County. So we said the reason we come here is that we can zoom in to below the county level. So let's look at Navajo County. So this is Native American predominance, but if you get in closer, we can see this is the middle of the county. So we're looking at Winslow, Holbrook, Snowflake, Show Low, Pine Top, Lakeside. So in these areas, the predominant race is actually white, right? And as opposed to the north end of the county and the south end of the county, which is very green, dominated by Native American Indian. Okay, that's one case. Let's zoom out and take a look at some other areas. Let's zoom into the Phoenix metro area. So if you look at Maricopa County and Pinal County, both of them have white as the predominant race, and Pinal is slightly more white than Maricopa. But if you zoom in, we see the diversity in here. So this this kind of grayish blue color is Hispanic. And we can see the Hispanics are concentrated in the West Valley here. I think this is I-17, so this is 19th Avenue. In here, it's west of 19th Avenue, and south of this, I think this is the Northern Avenue. So west of 19th Avenue and south of Northern Avenue, and also in South Phoenix and around Sky Harbor Airport. So that's the area that has heavy Hispanic concentration. And if you move east a little bit, we can see we also have some concentration around downtown Mesa and downtown Chandler, right? But if you get closer, the rest of it is mostly white. But if you get closer, you can see, wow, at this point, you start to see a different color. And this is Asian, non-Hispanic Asian. Because Asian is such a small population in Arizona, if you look at even the census tract level, you don't see a tract that's that has Asian as predominant race. You zoom in, I believe this is the census. This is the block group. Let me see. Yeah, this is the block group. So when you get to the block group level, you can start to see some smaller race groups that that might be the predominant group. So now we're zooming into the block level. Let's see, I believe this is block. Yeah, that's a block. So we have several blocks, block groups that's predominantly Asian in this Chandler area. But again, you probably have heard the block level data is really, really noisy because of differential privacy. So similarly, if you look at the Tucson area in Pima, so the Hispanic population is concentrated along the I-10 corridor and also south and west of it. And this red thing is non-Hispanic, 2 or more races. Don't get too excited about this. If you click, it has a grand total population of 1. So, and this is, total population is 1. But if you look at all these subcategories, everybody is 0. I don't know what's going on here. I look at my data, it's actually 1 or 2 or more races. They're trying to protect somebody's privacy in here. That 1 could be 2, could be 10, could be 0 because of the differential privacy protection. Okay. I think that's let me get back to my presentation. That's it. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was, well, I had a ton of fun. And I hope my colleagues and the public did as well, diving into understanding our population. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was so relevant and informative, and I open it up to my colleagues for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I found it really interesting, and I love the comparison from 10 years ago. That was really helpful to see that. You'd mentioned the diversity index, and you went through the diversity and the prevalence. How different is the diffusion score from any of that? Because you didn't really go into that.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that part. The diffusion score is basically, if you look at the largest 3 groups and take that out, the rest of it is the diffusion score. Diffusion score, in Arizona, I think the diffusion score is around 10, 11, and different counties have different numbers. It's it's just another way of looking at it. Are we, are we in a place where the largest three group is everybody? We don't have many. We don't have, the smaller groups, or do we have or are we a place where, in addition to the largest three group, we also have some very small groups, but collectively they make up a significant population. So that's what is measuring. Yeah, you have that website, and when you go there, you can take a look. It's just simply you take the largest three groups and take that out, and the rest of it combined. That's the diffusion score. It's a percentage of the population.
Okay, but what we're seeing is not a huge difference between the different indices anyway, right? So, when you compared the diversity and prevalence, they weren't drastically different. So I would assume the same thing with the diffusion score, that it's not going to give us a huge difference in the way we look at things.
Yeah, I don't know how you would, you would be able to use this in your work, but I thought I would just introduce these concepts. And I should have said at the beginning, I'm not an expert in this at all, and I don't know how this will be applied. I just come here as an outsider in this redistricting business, just trying to give you some perspective, and you may find something, completely irrelevant. Some other things might be useful. So. That's how I'm approaching this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions? I have a couple, and if it is veering outside of your scope of expertise, just please, be honest. I'm curious about understanding the changes. What's driving those changes? Is it a migration or different, minority groups, coming into Arizona, leaving Arizona, or there different birth rates? Helping us understand why there's that shift, and second to that, and this may be going even further, you gave great illustrations of where these different communities are. Are there reasons why they're there? Are there economic drivers or factors that are contributing to groups congregating in these areas that would be helpful for us to understand? And in your response, please clarify what's outside your scope so that we know how to then turn to the types of experts that would answer the questions most appropriately.
Okay, the first one I can try to answer. The second one, probably not much. Let me try. So the changes. I can use a few examples. We all know that let me refer back to my slide. I may not necessarily show them, but I want to take a look at them. So for all the major race groups in Arizona, they grew between 2010 and 2020, but they grew at different rates. And I think it's not a surprise that the Hispanics grew faster than the white non-Hispanic population. But some of you, I'm not sure if some of you, but some, the community that I know, or the experts that I know, may have expected faster growth of the Hispanic population. And after all, you see the proportion that used to be 29.6, and now it's 30.7. It's only 1 percentage point, even though it's a 15.7% growth from 2010 to 2020. One reason, I think I kind of mentioned this in my previous presentation, one reason the Hispanic population might not be growing as fast as some might have expected is the birth rate really came down. It used to be 15 years ago, the Hispanic birth rate was over 3, and the non-Hispanic population birth rate, we're talking about the total fertility rate, was around 2. So that was a difference of 1. And currently, they are both under 2. The difference is like 0.2, not even quite 0.2. So that differential really almost disappeared. So that contributed to the not so dramatic growth of the Hispanic population. Another thing is Arizona's growth is really driven these days by migration than birth. And migration and domestic migration is the largest part as opposed to international migration. And remember, our state is more Hispanic than the nation as a whole. And when we receive migration from outside of the state, the Hispanic population of migrants is not as high as in our state. So there may be there is this kind of migration has the effect of diluting the Hispanic growth. So the growth, the people we get from outside of state does not have as high of a Hispanic concentration. So that explains why Hispanic grow, but not as fast as some might have expected. And Native American population also grew, but at a much slower rate. One of the reasons is also their birth rate has dropped dramatically as well. I don't have the numbers in my head, but it's used to have a large differential, but the differential is now much smaller. So that's another reason. But for the some other race and 2 or more races, that I have to say a lot of that is probably due to the change in questionnaire design. And there is some real growth, but it's just difficult to separate those out. The growth in Asian and Black populations, Asian is continuously driven by international migration. And for Black population, we have a small population to begin with. And if you think about it, our Black population is only about 4%. Previously, it was less than 4%, and now it's just slightly more than 4%. And for the nation, that percentage is much higher. When our population growth is driven by migration, it's it's easier to drive that number up more fast. And so that's my explanation for why the differential changes between the races. For why people gather, I'm really not an expert, and I'll just defer to other experts.
Thank you. That was very informative.
I have another question that may or may not be something you can address. You gave us good information, kind of just a brief look at where populations are located now, looking at that map, at the maps that you showed. How have populations shifted over time in terms of where they're living? So for example, if we look at the Asian population, I know that there are some clusters around Arizona State University, University of Arizona, around the universities. There's some in Mesa. So as an example, how would those have shifted from other locations? Have we seen certain populations cluster more or change their locations? The Hispanic population, you gave us a few locations where you see high numbers. How did that change from 10 years ago or 20 years ago? I don't know if that's something you can address, but.
Yeah, I have not really studied this in any depth. I'm not a geographer. That's not an excuse. It's just not really my focus. I'm sure this question would be a fascinating question for some geographers who really focus on questions like this. They study population, but their focus is more of the geography, the geographic distribution and change over time. I think some geographers would love this kind of questions. Yeah, I can give you some, to me, some common sense answers, but not scholarly. So
That's fine. Thank you. That's okay. Thank you.
I don't know. Since you talk about the migration, this may not directly answer your question, but it may be relevant. You'll see this is the nationwide change or migration from rural areas to major metropolitan areas. And you see that in Arizona, the growth, like I think the growth in Maricopa County accounted for about 80% of the growth of the state. And, this is not exception. This is nationwide. For 2010 to 2020, more than half of the counties in the nation lost the population. And those are, most of those are smaller rural counties. And we see this in our state. We have 5 counties that actually lost the population. And Maricopa just gets bigger and bigger. We see Maricopa grow more than 15%. It's the largest county. It also grow at the largest, at the highest rate. Usually, it's easier for smaller counties to achieve higher rate of growth, right? But here we have Maricopa that grow at the highest rate. So that's something that we're seeing nationwide, not specific to any race or ethnicity, just population in general, urban versus rural. Whether we like it or not, that's happening.
Any other questions? Dr. Chang, you've elicited a lot of thought and a lot of deeper questioning, which is fabulous. If there's no other follow-up questions of Dr. Chang, thank you so much for your presentation. I believe it will be online in our newsroom. It's always a great resource to be able to go back and revisit the information. And we appreciate, your contributions.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And just note, I made some very slight changes since I provided the slide to you yesterday. So I will send this again. Please just, ignore that one, use this one. Nothing substantive, but just some typo and stuff. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll sign off.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
But before we move to the next agenda item, I'm going to use our discretion to jump to a future item, which is addressing future agenda item requests, agenda item number 8. This presentation was compelling, and I think it raised a lot of thought in our minds. One follow-up question that I have relates to the Latino community. We're about to be embarking on, serious decision-making as it relates to the mapping. And it's essential that we understand the majority-minority districts that we have in our state. The Latino community is over 30% of our population. And not only are they concentrated in these particular areas, but the evidence shows that their voting behavior is unique, such that it warrants these, particular majority-minority districts. It was unfair of, to ask Dr. Chang, even though we did anyway, to dive deeper into some of their historical patterns of migration, their economic interests, their political, needs. And so I would like to ask us collectively, if there's consensus, to maybe seek additional information to dive deeper into this population, to maybe ask our council to look into some academics or experts that might be able to dive deeper into the questions that Dr. Chang is not prepared to answer. I don't know if there are thoughts of this. We can defer it when we bring up this issue on agenda number 8, but it was so relevant to this particular topic, I felt the need to bring it up.
Chairwoman Newberg, I completely support you with that. I would love to hear more in depth on that. And I'm not sure if, I mean, the council gave a great presentation on the American Indian population. I don't know if they would want to do that or bring in academics, but I would really support hearing more. That was part of my question of how have things shifted over time as well. So I'm very interested in what you're talking about.
Okay. How about, just for the sake of integrity of the agenda and maybe a little bit of my neuroses with keeping order, let's revisit this when we come back to agenda item 8, and we could think about, you know, ideas and throw it out to our staff. Comments, anything else on agenda item number 5, this fantastic state demographer's presentation? Okay, with that, we will move to agenda item number 6, update from mapping consultants, Timmons and DC. Please take it away, Mark and Doug.
Good morning. Good to see you on another day, back to back. We got a lot of updates today. First, I want to just formally introduce a member of my team that's joining us today. Brian Kingery is here with us. He is a senior consultant here with Timmons, and he will be helping present some of the stuff that we're going to present today. You probably did see him at the training yesterday. He was the one that conducted your training session. So I just wanted to formally welcome him to everybody else that's here on staff and on the call. For the mapping software public training, we did have our training yesterday. I think that went really well. The slide deck, I believe, is now on IRC's website. It is also on the hub too, so if they want to get there, they are more than welcome to. And Brian, I believe you put the YouTube link on the hub too, so we can get to it pretty easily.
Correct.
Awesome. There was a question that came up about technical support for the redistricting system. So I wanted to just revisit that a tiny bit here. When I think about technical support, I'm thinking technical support of the actual system. The system's not working, the application's down, the server's down, those kind of things, maybe a password reset. We're definitely going to provide technical support for that. That's not a problem. But end user support or training, we don't anticipate providing one-on-one workshops with the public for end user support. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Our goal is to continue to add training though in videos going forward. We have any questions from the public or from the training?
So Mark, I appreciated the training yesterday. Thank you, Brian, for that. You had said that you probably would have those short clips up this week. So as you've been mentioning, so that people don't have to watch a whole long thing.
Yep. I believe, don't quote me exactly on this number, but I believe we already have 4 that are ready to go, and we're actually generating them as we speak right now. I have another staff member doing that. So that's the goal, is that redistricting system page on the hub will be continually being updated.
Thank you.
How was the participation from the public yesterday? Did we see very many people?
I think from our side, we looked at the YouTube, and I think there was maybe 60 at one point. But I'll be honest, I wasn't watching the YouTube the whole time, as I was here joining you guys through Google Meets.
I can say that we did see about 20 accounts created on the system yesterday.
Okay. Any other questions on the training?
Mark, I don't have questions on the training. I had questions on submissions and all, but I don't know where that's probably in your best practices. So I'm going to hold off and hear what you have to say there. Maybe my questions may get answered right then.
Okay. If not, we'll definitely come back. Not a problem. Some of the general updates. Doug, you want to give just the general where we are at in the process of the polarized voting report?
Sure. Just a quick update. We do not have the polarized voting report to present to you today. We have made good progress on it. We're still going through the data, getting the data formatted and cleaned up, and figuring out exactly which races give us useful data. So we know it's a priority item and trying to get through that quickly. I doubt we'll have it by next week, but hopefully not too long after next Tuesday.
Doug Johnson.
Mhm.
What about both the polarized and competitive were due today? What about the competitive? Is that one also getting ready?
Yes, the competitiveness and demographic data for the grid map is almost ready, and we hope to publish it this week. So the next thing we got in our agenda is the community of interest report discussion. I'm sure everybody has seen the community of interest report, but let me bring it up here on the screen and we can go over it, answer any questions that you guys might have. Let me bring it up here. Okay, let me share my screen with you guys. Can you see the screen yet?
Not yet.
No.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, it's loading in.
Yes.
Okay. Community of interest report. So this is all the data that people turned in electronically, or they filled out a paper survey at the in-person listening tour sessions. We got 910 digital submissions, and we got over 200 paper-based submissions. And I believe the ending number we got was about 1,160 something total submissions, which public outreach and participation was awesome. We got a lot of interest. And, just comparing the amount of data that we got, if we compared California's data set, which is an entirely larger state than us, they only had, at the time that I pulled the data when we closed, over 1,600 community of interest submittals. And we were in the 1100s. And you just think about the difference of size between Arizona and California, and their community of interest application was actually open for a lot more days than we are. The public participation has been really great. So I just wanted to throw that out there to the commission that Arizona is active. They are participating with us. So I think that was really good.
And Mark and Doug, I also just want to give a shout out to your team for the turnaround time in processing this data. I don't know how many other, teams around the nation are processing, as much data as we are in as compressed of a time. So I just want to give a shout out for, you must have been working, around the clock, 24/7. So thank you.
No, you're very welcome. So the community of interest report, it's a story map. It is publicly available. So what we really wanted to do is, you probably have seen this map before, right? This was the 910 digital submittals that we had. And this big spiderweb map, we wanted to try to get it to digest a little easier so you could understand what does all this blue data mean. Because right now, it probably doesn't mean that much looking at it at this scale. So what we wanted to do here is we wanted to boil it down a little bit. And what we did was we wanted to create communities that could be used during the redistricting process. And we wanted to look at overlap counts. So where one person put a polygon in that said, this is my community of interest, and another person put a very similar polygon in, and where are the overlaps? And we were counting those overlaps. And in the end, it turned out to be about 182 groups that were covered. And you can see here, we have just an example here on the right-hand side, which is the Catalina foothills. And you can see that the heat map, so the red means that there is more overlap all the way out to sort of the white border. There's 5 different classes here to the least amount of people having an overlap. Does everybody understand by overlap what I'm talking about? Okay. So then what we wanted to do is to look at this more on a state level. So we came down here and we built this one, which is the community of interest overlap class count. So this is all the data sitting statewide, and a user can come here to the widget here and they can select what they want to see. So if they only want to see the highest, they can click on the highest overlap count and we can see where it draws sitting here on the map. Then if we want to see, well, where's the next highest category? We can start to see where the next highest category is, all the way down to the lowest. So if people just wanted to see, where is my lowest categories, you can see that there is still a big spider web of entries that we have here in the state. So we thought it'd be good to allow people to sort of drill down into the data and see just maybe where the highest counts were, or maybe even down to the medium. So we're putting that data and into the public's hands, into your guys' hands to make analysis. The last piece that we wanted to put in here was looking at where all these community of interest fit, because sometimes those overlap polygons could look a little too much data. So how do we actually amalgamate it down even more? So we basically built these dots that take all of the data that we have for the community of interest and sort of say aggregate it together by location. So the bigger dots mean that there's more submittals in that area. So you can see this one big dot up here in the Flagstaff area says that it actually has 8 features. The big dot here in Phoenix actually means that it has 32 features. And then as the user wants to come in here and zoom in, you can see these dots are very responsive and they start to drill down to smaller scales as you zoom in. And when you zoom in all the way, you can see that we have the community of interest names here. And why is this important? Because you can actually drill down to each of these community of interest to look at the polygons that are associated here with the community of interest. So say I wanted to zoom in here and there's Kyrene School District here. So how could I use this? I could come over here and click on Kyrene School District. If I wanted just the PDF of the Kyrene School District of what people submitted, I can click on it and here is their community of interest PDF. So here's the exact data that's on a web map with the same data that you could go print if you wanted today. And each community of interest has this attached to it as a PDF. The second thing that you can do, if you want to just use a digital form, you can come in here and turn on the community of interest overlap count layer. And you can come in here and select any community of interest that you want. You can either scroll down or you can type in the search bar. In this instance, we will use Kyrene. So we have Kyrene School District here. And we can turn this on and you can see once I turn on this overlap count, here is the data that we got for the community of interest of Kyrene School District. And if you want to start to compare and see overlaps, I can come over here and say, well, I see something that says South Tempe here. Let me scroll down to South Tempe. And now I can start to see, where the overlaps are. So South Tempe is this light yellow overlap here. I wanted to turn that off. And say, well, let's see what this other big one is. We have We have Chandler and we have South Tempe Chandler. So if we go here and look at Chandler, so there's Chandler's border. Then I think we saw Tempe. So you can start to see how all this data gets put together and how they overlap each other. It's a lot of data, and how can we easily display it for public consumption and for everybody to easily understand it. And then at the very end, what we did, and like I say, the instructions here are on the left side of the screen. So if you want to go back, the instructions are here. It tells you step-by-step instructions on how to do that. If you want to just download all of the community PDFs, you just come here, click the PDFs. It's going to take a second to load. Switch tabs. We're just waiting for the PDF to load. And here's an entire series of all the PDFs that are in the system if a user wanted to just print them that way and consume them. So we have that available. And then if we jump back to the Community of Interest report at the very bottom, we have paper-based forms.
Mark, just a quick question on the paper-based. Are those also embedded now into the digital? Did you included them? So the data that we look at has both what people submitted on paper and digitally, right?
Well, the paper-based forms have been put in there, but we have not converted them to digital. And the reason we did not take their geographic area and put them into digital, because then there would be some type of subjectivity of us trying to interpret exactly what they said. So we definitely put it in their exact words written there in the Excel, but we did not digitize their data set. But we wanted to make sure that you had access to what was submitted paper-based.
Yep. So we have a downloadable Excel spreadsheet that has all of those paper-based submissions. So you can see from what the ones that were legible, what was submitted. And then if you take a good look through there, you'll see some submissions that, the subjectivity could be taken out, and exactly, what intersection to what intersection a person is talking about, or a physical geographic element, like the intersection of this highway and this road and this stream, whereas other people just said the county to this county, or it was a little bit not as clear for us to be able to digitize onto a map.
And thank you so much for providing the qualitative data, those written reports that are not necessarily put into the mapping, because the commissioners are reading it all. And I want to assure, the public that even if you can't tackle being able to submit a map, your words are reaching us and we're reading them. And in terms of technologically friendly, I hope everybody has gone on the Community of Interest site. I'm as challenged as anybody, and I found it incredibly user-friendly, and the data so rich. I mean, just such a wealth of information that I hope everybody dives deep to learn about, who we all are. I thought you all did a great job.
I'll agree. Just I'm enjoying kind of researching and learning about it. But I did have a question, because I think it's great. It's a great tool. And I guess this is maybe for Doug Johnson. I'm not sure. But at one point early on, we talked about what if we get loads of information that's basically duplicative, and how do we distinguish between that when we're looking at things like community of interest? What if 20 people all submit essentially the same map, and now it looks like that and two people submit something else, but it's more of a, you know, it's an effort to try to influence things one way or the other. And you said numbers wouldn't be the only thing we would be looking at. So maybe could you speak to how do we as commissioners judge whether we're, you know, where we're just having a big campaign to put one particular thing in versus distinguishing the community of interest overall? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think to some degree you summarize it well, where it's the insight and value of the idea, not the quantity of people submitting the idea that matters, or that we recommend matters at least. You know, ultimately it's the commission's judgment and decision, right? That of which items you'll give weight to and which you won't give as much weight to. But I think that is the key takeaway for the public, is to know it's not a matter of whether you get 5 friends or 500, you know, political action committee members to show up. It's the quality of the idea, and how well it meets the criteria laid out in Prop 106 ultimately.
So I've been thinking about that as I was looking at some of those clusters that Mark just showed us, where we'd see those high density areas. We got a lot of submissions. So I guess from our perspective, we then just need to look and see if we get a lot of duplicates. We need to understand that those are just duplicates versus people saying, here's my idea versus the next person, here's my idea. There might be slight differences, but they might overlap a lot. So that would be helpful for us to be able to distinguish.
Yes, and keep in mind, a lot of this you can verify with data, right? So, you know, now that the community, now we have a whole bunch of people from different groups that have brought up Kyrene school district as a community of interest of note. We can go get the official map of the Kyrene school district to overlay and nail down on, you know, what are the official boundaries compared to where different people drew the map. So it's a combination of the public's input and, where available, confirmation with quote unquote official data.
Yeah, I think that, to me, that's one of the challenges. We're just going to have to really be careful about campaigns about particular areas and recognizing that versus getting lots of good information from lots of people, which is what we're hoping for.
Commissioner Lerner, I'm confident that the commissioners are digesting the information we're receiving, with thought. And so I feel confident that we're going to be able to discern quality, quantity, and all of that. Obviously, with the partnership and help of staff, if there are quantitative, measures to help us digest that. But I think we're all learning, and I think we can catch that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I guess I wanted to just raise the awareness of that.
Okay, any other further conversation about the community of interest report? I have one question, and then I'm going to suggest that maybe we take a break. It's a logical break point before we dive into grid maps and finish the meeting. My last question has to do with, how is mapping going to be collecting additional data moving forward in the public hearing? So in the previous public hearings, the data collection was focused on a community of interest report. Now we're embarking on additional hearings. How are you going to be collecting that data and sharing back that collection of data with us?
Doug, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think that actually plays very well into the next step of this, which is the discussion of the Redistricting Hub and the grid. So I think that's where that data will all be showing up.
Then let's, unless there's any other questions, comments on material that we've addressed to this point, I'm going to suggest we take a, 7 to 10 minute break. Is that good with the team? Okay, we'll see everybody sharply at, I'm going to say 9:38 to 9:39. So we dive right in at 9:40, if possible. Okay, thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I see everybody's cameras kind of coming on live. We'll wait another minute. And if you're there, please let us know you're available. All right, we'll give another minute for Commissioner York. I don't know if you're there through audio or camera.
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. I believe we have our entire team reconvened, and so we will turn it back over to mapping.
Thanks. So the next topic that we have is to show to you guys the grid maps. And Brian Kingery will go over the grid maps with you guys.
You guys hear me now?
Yes.
All right, let me share my screen and we'll get started. So in yesterday's public training session, I talked about the Redistricting Hub and how, one second. So yesterday during the public training session, I spoke about the Redistricting Hub, where all of the GIS and mapping content will be featured for this project. So now I'm going to show you, walk you through the website essentially, and then we'll get to the grid map. So here's the home page. Some of this content is not live yet, such as the grid map that I'm going to show, but some of the other applications like the community of interest story map that we just reviewed is located here on the maps and apps. So here's a dashboard that just shows another way to view all of the submissions. Here's access to that story map. And then we also have a couple other applications that look at the state of Arizona, different demographic variables. These are based off of 2019 variables. So if you're interested to see how the change between 2019 and the newly released 2020 variables, you can do so. Next up is the redistricting system. Since yesterday, I've updated at the bottom of the page a link to the recorded YouTube live training session, as well as access to the training slides. And as Mark said earlier, we're actively creating videos and other documentation that we'll post to this page shortly. Without further ado, we will get to the grid map. So what is the grid map? The grid map is essentially meant to serve as a starting point in the redistricting system, and it's only based on a few constraints, a few rules rather, shown on the bullet points within the list. So I'm going to go through those bullet points, and then we'll jump right into a version of the grid map that follows all these criteria. So first, the grid map needs to originate at the township median. That median has been identified as the corner of Grand Avenue, 19th Avenue, and McDowell and Phoenix. When this page goes live, you'll be able to interact with all this content, download zipped shape files so you can work with those dissolved districts outside of the redistricting system and port them in, create plans that way. I have a quick view link, which you can easily open in Google Maps. Below here, I have an embedded interactive map where you can search for your address, see in relation where you are located or where an address of interest is located to the township median. The next is at that township median, the state is going to be divided into quadrants. So we're essentially creating a grid for the grid map, quadrants 1 through 4. which leads into the next rule. The next rule states that starting in grid 1, you need to move in a clockwise manner throughout the state. So that's what this graphic here represents. So this red crosshairs is the township median. Starting in the blue grid 1, you need to move in a clockwise manner before going into grid 2, grid 3, and then grid 4. And then the next is, with the exception of Maricopa County, once a county has started to be assigned to a district, whether that's one of the 30 legislative districts or one of the 9 congressional districts, once a county has started to be assigned to that district, the entire county must be assigned before moving to the next. The next is each of the 9 congressional and 30 legislative districts. For this balanced, equal representation grid map, it needs to have only a difference of plus or minus 1 person. So a key point to take into account from the training yesterday in the redistricting system, we're allowing plans to be submitted with 10% deviation, so plus or minus 5%. But for this grid map, we really wanted to focus on only looking at that sole variable of total population and then creating districts as a starting point that only has a plus or minus of a single person. And looking at the total population of the 2020 census, there's 7.15 million people across the state of Arizona. So dividing that by 9, that means that 3 of the congressional districts will have 1 additional person. So that's 794,612, where the remaining 6 will then have 611. And then out of the 30 legislative, 12 legislative districts will have 238,384, with 18 having 383, 1 less. And then the last and final rule is that each district is required to be compact and contiguous. So compactness is the shape of the district. I wanted to keep it, if you drop an egg on the floor and it splatters, or if you shoot a paintball at the wall and how it hits, it's more in a circular splatter type of appearance. You don't have essentially a district that's a thin, long line or wrapping around a certain community, not including them. So that's compactness. The next one is contiguous, essentially meaning that all of the census blocks that are in a district, they need to be connected. You can't have District 1, a census block assigned to District 1 in the northeast part of the state, and then the rest of District 1 in the southwest portion of the state. They all have to touch. And then that note that is added there below the compactness line, the grid maps that I'm going to show here in a second, there are labels of 1 through 9 and 1 through 30, respective to the district or congressional and legislative. Those district numbers are not meant to say this is District 4. Those numbers, the 1 through 9 and 1 through 30, are simply meant to say the district that's labeled with 1, that's where we started. Then we moved to 2, and then 3, and then 4. That was just the order of how we assigned those districts. So with that rule there about the city of Prescott, needs to be located in legislative District 1. Once the final plan is made, it'll follow that note. All right, so without further ado, here are some static maps, and then below are graphs that I'll show, and also there are interactive maps which provide, being able to interact, zoom in, and get a lot greater detail than a static map provides. So here are the statewide view and the 1 to 500,000 scale view zoomed into the township median in Maricopa County. For the congressional maps, you can see from my cursor here that district number 1 is here, and then moving north, in a clockwise manner. Here's District 2. And then starting back at the origin of the township median in grid 2, goes to District 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then starting again at the township median, 7, and then again going into grid 4, 8, and 9. So you can see clearly the pattern that we followed in making these. And I can't stress enough that when our team put these maps together, we only looked at census tract to census block and only looked at total population. We did not look at any other variables, any other physical geographic elements like where a mountain range was or a river or anything like that. We simply looked at the latest 2020 data for total population and then the tiger boundaries that represent from the geographies from the tract to the block level. And so this next set of maps, it's the same view. It's just shown with county boundaries turned on. So the colors did not change between the first set of maps that I showed and this set. It's only showing the difference is the county. So looking at this for district number 5, represented in orange, you can see that a portion of District 5 is in Maricopa County, and then it takes up all of Pinal and then moves into Pima. Whereas you can see District 6 down here, it consists of 3 counties. So you can tell the same pattern that we tried to follow. I will say that throughout this process, we started at the census tract level to get us close. And then once we were in a certain range, we switched over to blocks so that we could really fine tune to get the math to add up correctly so that every district had equal representation in terms of total population. So here is a graph of the grid map for congressional districts, districts 1 through 9, with the color, the symbology of the polygons carried over. And you can see from this graph, District 1, District 5, and District 6 have that 612, have that 1+1 population count. And then everything that I just showed, it's the same pattern for the legislative here. So here is the statewide and the township median 1 to 500 scale. So you can't get a lot of detail in Maricopa County at the statewide scale. So that's why there are zoomed in map extents as well as the interactive map that is available to the commission to look at. So here is the township median. So 1, 2, 3, 4, then moving into this county is 5, 6, 7. You can see the pattern that we followed. Here is that same view of those maps just with the county boundaries turned on. So you can see that Yavapai County, pretty much all of Yavapai is in 5, and then you have Coconino and Navajo in 6. You have down here in Pima County, in the Tucson area, districts 17, 18, and I believe 20, right there over Tucson. And then here is the population breakdown. So the top graph are the districts that have 238,338 or 383, and then the lower graph are the districts that have that additional population count. So as you can see, just from what I've shown so far, every district that has been made in this grid is balanced and meeting the criteria of that ±1 person. Here we have the maps published and interactive. Nothing that I'm showing right now is currently available for the public to explore. Currently in this presentation, it's really just viewing my screen only. But if the commission wants these to be made public, all I need is 5 minutes and they can be made public. So on the left, these 2 maps are designed to stay in sync. On the left are congressional, on the right are legislative. You can zoom in, search for an address. Here I'm zooming into the township median, and you can see, like these deviations. That's where we had to go and grab census blocks from another district or another grid altogether to bring over to make all the math work. So here on the left are congressional, and on the right are legislative. Also, just a more flexible way to view it, if you don't want to see the side-by-side comparison, is we have a grid map present where you can turn on and off both the legislative and congressional boundaries. And then also loaded here, the same source that Dr. Cheng used with the Esri data and showing the atlas of Census 2020. This is the same data that's in there. So you can zoom into that township median and turn on the tracks and be able to see, it's symbolized by size of population within that tract. And we have that loaded into this map all the way from the state level all the way down to the census block level. So you do have a little bit more flexibility. You can zoom really close into the census block, that street level, and see where everything has been allocated, the counts of the population for each census block, and follow along with the methodology that we use. And with that, I guess we'll open it back up to Mark and the commission. Any questions, comments?
As we approach this conversation, I want to orient, what we're looking at. And so our mission as a commission is to adopt a grid map that basically sets things to zero, starts from scratch, and reflects congressional and legislative districts of equal population that we asked our mapping team to provide to us. And so as we, dive into this topic, please feel free to ask process questions, etc. But let's refrain from commenting on the substance of the lines, since that is what we will be doing in subsequent weeks. And so with that, I open it up to my colleagues. Are there questions? And there may well not be questions. And in my mind, there are no questions. I only have a very simple question. Do these grid maps reflect what we asked our mapping team to provide? Did they set, the benchmark clean? Did they create equal populations to meet the constitutional criteria to start as a starting point for our work? And if there are no substantive comments or questions on that, I'll entertain a motion, because we should approve these maps as a starting point. Comments, questions, and then I'll entertain a motion to approve these grid maps.
This is Commissioner Lerner. I would move to approve the grid maps.
And Commissioner Meal seconds.
Any further conversation?
I would just say, nice work.
Thank you. Definitely a team effort.
Yeah, I echo that too.
Okay, we'll do a vote. Vice Chair Watchman.
Aye.
Commissioner Meal. Commissioner Lerner.
Aye.
Commissioner York.
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye, and with that, we have adopted our grid maps as a starting point, and we look forward to moving forward in the process. Thank you so much for your due diligence in providing this great template.
Is this,
Thank you.
is this going to be live then? Can we ask for that to be made live at this time now that it's been approved?
Correct. I need about 5 minutes, and when you go to the hub site and click grid maps, you'll get to this page that I'm showing right here, and you'll have access to interact, explore, download, and so on. And then I will say, Mark, do you want to address the redistricting system when the approved grid maps will be loaded in?
Yeah, so we're going to turn around in 24 hours is our plan to get them put in and the templates available for the public.
So you'll remember in the training yesterday, I used demo grid maps with 4 districts just to show the functionality of the system. Once these newly adopted grid maps are entered in the system, those demo grid maps of the 4 districts will be removed, so that when a user goes into the redistricting system, it's live. They'll be able to submit, work on and then submit 9 district plans and 30 district plans based off of these adopted grids.
This Commissioner Meal, will there be a link on our main website that takes us to this hub?
I believe that's the case already, and if not, I would highly recommend on the map section of the IRC website adding a link to this hub site.
There is currently a link in our mapping section, so the public can go to irc.az.gov/maps, and the link's right there.
Thank you.
Okay, so exciting. And I just want to remind the public, when you see these lines, these are arbitrary starting point lines. And so as you submit your feedback, understand that there's no meaning behind any of these lines outside of equal population. Okay. Anything else on grid maps? If not, we welcome you to move into E, the best practices after grid maps, which we will be starting in an hour.
Yes, thank you. So best practices after grid map. I'm going to turn it over to Doug, and I believe he has a presentation for you.
Yes, thank you. And just to reassure everyone, this is a fairly short presentation compared to a lot of the ones I've given before. So let me go to share my screen. Oh, let me make it presentation mode. I'll share that. Here we go. Okay, there you go. So just to kind of frame what I'm about to talk about, the idea is to give a little discussion about a typical, I want to emphasize it's typical, not required. This is all up to the Commission's discretion. A typical process for what we're calling decision meetings, in particular focusing on the Commission's role in those meetings, which is, of course, front and center in those decision meetings. And just, I mean, by decision meetings, for those who haven't followed the discussion up to this point, is we've had the listening tour. The Commission is now planning on doing another series of really listening meetings to get public input. What I'm focusing on for this is when the Commission comes together to actually make decisions on what changes to make to the grid map after hearing from those public input sessions. So let me go to the next slide. Big picture, this is very big picture. The Commission and the Commissioners individually really have the key responsibility of adopting 3 maps. I'm very happy to say number 1 is now complete. The Commission has adopted its grid map. Now, set forth in Prop 106, we have 2 more steps. The first is the adoption of a draft map, and then after additional input time, adopting a final map. So those are your formal responsibilities. course, as part of that responsibility is the commission's, or as part of that process, it is the commission's responsibility to listen to the public input. And at one point, Prop 106 actually spells out a chance for the legislature to weigh in, share its input. And then based on that input, based on data, and based on your judgment, to adjust the grid, the original grid maps, based on those criteria that are spelled out in Prop 106. So very big picture, that's your responsibility, and that's what we're all focusing on as we try to look ahead to how to achieve these goals and fulfill these responsibilities. Of course, there are two maps that the commission ultimately approves. One is a legislative map and one is a congressional map. Trying to discuss them simultaneously doesn't really work. Even when there is a common issue, for example, a neighborhood being split the same way in both maps and that community wants to be put back together. Even if that piece, specific issue raised, applies to both maps, how you would achieve that, and the term you'll hear a lot is rippling, ripples differently through each map. So if you move population in the legislative map, that has impacts on all the surrounding districts and has different impacts than moving that same population in the congressional map would have. So you really can't, even when there's the same concern in both maps, you really can't make decisions on how to address that concern simultaneously in both maps. Which is what has led past commissions and local commissions we've worked with as well that have similar issues to split the considerations and have separate public input times and separate commission deliberation and direction and ultimately decision times on the legislative map separate from the congressional map. And you can do those separate days. If you're having multi-day meetings, you can divide the days morning and afternoon. There's flexibility on that. I think it may end up being a mix of those. As there are tons of issues raised at the beginning of your decision meetings, maybe you need a whole day for each map. And then maybe when you narrow it down to just 2 or 3 final decisions, you can have a morning and an afternoon or some division like that. But the key thing is kind of having legislative time and congressional time separately. This also works out to allow time for your mapping team where there are larger challenges that can't be addressed in the spur of the moment by just checking on the map right then. Where there are larger challenges where the mapping team have to go away and work on how to implement what the commission has asked for. That gives time for them to go away while the commission focuses on the other map. So that helps as well. I really think of this decision meetings as having 3 steps. The initial step is going to be a big report where you get a summary of the public comments that have come in during the listening meetings that led up to this decision meeting. So just as you saw the community of input report being a summary of all the input that came in during the initial community of interest listening tour, similarly, you'll get a lot of input, and those will be summarized in some form at the start of the decision meeting. It may just be here's the website where all the materials have been posted. Here's a list of what the maps that have been posted, something like that. There will be some kind of report to you from staff and consultants on what's been heard so far. That would include, in particular, you'll get all the input, but that would include particular maps. Now that we have our grid, or 2 grids in this case, now I think you'll start to get a lot of maps from the public of district maps, either legislative or congressional plans statewide. Typically, there would then be a public comment period, either the way you've been doing them virtually or an in-person option, where folks could comment on what's been heard so far and ask that you take certain things into consideration. And that's all kind of to kick off the start of this decision meeting process. And then we get into the commission asking questions. We expect there to be tons of questions. And ultimately giving directions to the mapping team for changes you want to see. Some of those things, if they're small or easy changes, we can do live right there. what happens if you move this city block? Boom, we can show you that's pretty easy and simple. Especially if they're so small that they don't have a population ripple through all the surrounding districts. Others are bigger challenges. You know, the grid does not even try to keep cities together. It does not even try to keep tribal reservations together. So, you know, trying to put all those together are obviously bigger issues that we unlikely could answer live in a meeting. And just a reminder, as we talked about before, the idea is that each adjustment to the grid, we want to have a clear record on how that ties into the constitutional criteria and which criteria we're trying to meet in making that change. So that's kind of the first day, would be mainly getting a summary of all this input that's come in and an initial round of review and perhaps initial request for map changes from the commission. Then there'll be kind of a back and forth middle process where your mapping team would come back and present the results of trying to implement the commission's directions from the initial meeting or from the previous meeting the day before. It is likely that residents will continue to submit maps and other public comments as you go through your decision meeting process. And think of this as what we call an iterative process. It's not, we get an input of the public comments, we give one set of directions, and boom, we have a map. This is a much more complicated process of asking to see what happens if we do a change, deciding whether those ripples are small enough that it's worth it to make the change to achieve that constitutional criteria, or whether there was some unforeseen impact of making that change. And no, we don't want to implement that change into the map. So I expect that there will be, you know, again, this is a typical process. We're completely open to commission direction and decisions on this. And certainly there could be lots of good ideas on this, on how to manage these meetings beyond what I'm presenting today. But we expect there to be kind of the running, here's the grid with the very specifically implemented changes that the commission has approved so far. And then these kind of tests, can we put this together? Can we put that together? And the commission would evaluate the results of that test and whether or not to implement that and incorporate that into the running official map. But we do expect multiple rounds of, okay, we made this change. For example, I'm just randomly picking, you know, maybe we put Casa Grande together, but the ripple of that led to Saddlebrook not being with Tucson, and perhaps Saddlebrook wants to be with Tucson. I'm just randomly making things up. So as we wrestle through those, you'll go through different steps. Maybe there's another change that could then put Saddlebrook back with Tucson if Saddlebrook wants to be with Tucson. So you can go through this iterative process of tests and hopefully improving the map each step of the way. Then at the end of the decision meeting time, we would end up, essentially time will run out. We need to get to the next public input phase. And so as the commission evaluates the last set of requests, decides which of those to implement based on both your own judgment and public comment, there would then be adoption of that map. I do want to emphasize, though, that nothing is final until the whole map is final at the very end. So both from the commission's point of view, you know, you can always revisit earlier decisions. If some change seems to work great, and then a day or two later, there's some ripple from something else that runs into it, well, you can reconsider that first decision. This is important for the public to realize too, that if the public asks for a change, and that change is endorsed by the commission and implemented into the map, the public still needs to keep track of what's happening as this process goes forward. And the commission still needs to remember those earlier requests as there's pressure from other requested changes that might impact that original change. So this is a very dynamic process as you go through this. Then in the final step, when we're in the decision making process for the final maps, when we're at a near final map, both of the previous commissions and the elections clearly would like us to do this, have provided the maps to county elections officials for, say, a 24-hour review, a quick review, where they're just looking for what are called sliver precincts. Sometimes a line that the commission is looking at in the legislative map or the congressional map is just off, just barely off by 1 census block or something like that from the county's map, which may have justice of the peace lines and school board lines and city council lines incorporated in it. So this is a chance for the county elections folks to come back and say, hey, can we get rid of this sliver precinct? Historically, the last 2 commissions, almost all of them had no people in them. So it was a really easy fix to save a ton of elections administrative work each election cycle. Sometimes they do have a couple of people in it. For legislative maps, you'll have some flexibility on the population side. For congressional maps, obviously, moving any people at the very end is a bit of a hassle because of that need for near perfect population equality. This does bring up a larger question, though. I want to take a step back earlier in the process. As you're working with congressional maps, it is, as Brian from Timmons Group can now confirm, and as you have seen somewhat, it is an amazingly time-consuming process to take a district from a 1% deviation to a 0% deviation. So as you're working with your congressional map, going through this very dynamic iterative process, it may be worth not worrying about getting it down to perfect balance every single revision, as long as you're really close. You know, if you're within 1%, say, we know we can get it there, and then only worry about spending those hours and hours that it takes to do that in the final map to get it to perfect balance. That allows you to spend those hours looking at other options and looking at ways that the map may be improved, rather than just spending it trying to get it from 1,000 people off to 1 person off or 0 people off. So something to think about as you go through the process is often we won't worry about perfect balance until you get to that final map, and then we'll come back with changes that get it to perfect balance. So that's kind of a decision-making process, 3 steps to it. The initial, which is a lot of reports to you on what, and you reporting as well, on what you've heard at the public input sessions, and then going through this dynamic iterative process. A couple of big picture thoughts to keep in mind. Given the fantastic interest that the Arizona residents have already shown in this process, you know, we're likely to get, and we're hoping to get, tons of public comments and maps. It's just from a time perspective, it's likely to be impossible to respond to and discuss every public comment. We run into this even with cities, like working with cities and counties on redistricting. What we say is, don't bother. Don't feel the need to go through and reject every comment that you don't agree with. Focus on the positive. Focus your comments on what did each commissioner hear that appealed to you, that you thought made sense, and that you'd like to see at least tested and perhaps adopted into the changes to the grid map. And then whenever possible, as you're giving direction and talking about changes you'd like to see, keep in mind the ripples. You know, if you're moving population from District 1 to District 2 to put together City X, keep in mind you've taken people out of District 1, and somewhere District 1 has to get that population back. So how does that circle around work? Sometimes you just trade 2 side-by-side areas between the 2 districts. That's really easy. Other times you've got to ripple all the way around some other communities of interest and concern. And you might get, in a legislative map, you might have 7 districts passing 1,000 people all the way around in order to put a community together. So as you're giving direction, it's definitely helpful to us as your mapping team if you think about what those ripples and how you'd like to see them. You can, however, just say, show us what happens if we put this community together, and we will take into consideration what we've heard, the earlier directions you've given, and of course the criteria, and try to tie all those together into what we hope to present to you as the best map possible. Finally, I do want to emphasize that there are really two phases to this. As I mentioned earlier, when you're voting as a commission, you can kind of give a more informal direction, discussion of maps you'd like to see. As I mentioned, a lot of those things can be answered live without any vote or anything. Just how many people are here? Boom, we can give you that number. At the end of the decision meeting, obviously you're going to vote, as you just did for the grid. You're then going to vote on a draft map and ultimately vote on a final map. But keep in mind, as you're moving through this process, the difference between agreeing to look at something versus agreeing to actually incorporate that into your ongoing official map with a justification of how that adjustment to the grid makes sense from the constitutional criteria approach. So those are two things, and it's often useful as commissioners to think about the difference between those informal dynamic discussions and then actually voting to incorporate a change into your official map. So last thoughts, the grid map, as we've stated again and again, but now it's adopted, as we're saying, the grid map is intentionally designed to be massively revised. That's how the Constitution sets it up. Saying, let's just do this grid, and then here's a bunch of things we'll consider as we redraw possibly the whole map. To a lesser degree, but still true to a degree, the draft map is only a draft. It does, that's why there's listening time, and that's why there's additional meetings after the draft map is adopted. One key thought that comes out of that is you have your schedule. Generally speaking, it's better to adopt that draft map on schedule and move on to getting that public input than to wrestle with losing days of potential public input time as you wrestle with trying to get a more perfect draft map. If you look back at the draft maps that the last two commissions adopted, obviously they both faced significant changes as they went through and became the final map. And as I stated earlier, only the final map is final. Every decision prior to that can be revisited. So keep that in mind, and the public should definitely keep that in mind as they kind of stay vigilant to make sure that the changes that they want for their community continue through as the map goes on. So that's my presentation, and happy to answer any questions you have. I hope that was useful to you. And again, as a final thought, this is just kind of what we've seen in our experience working both with the first commission, reviewing the last commission's work, and then in working with lots of local commissions as well.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug. That was very helpful to go through the process. That's I appreciate hearing that. I have a couple of questions about public involvement and public input. Is this an okay time to ask those?
Yes, please.
Okay. So as we know, we're all doing the training on how to use the program, and it is a bit complicated as we're all learning as part of it. So I think I asked this question yesterday at the training, but I want to ask it today because we're all together. And you had answered yesterday about if I am looking, and we just brought up Kyrene School District or the Chandler Tempe area, right? So if I am just focused on that area, I don't want to do a whole statewide map. I don't have the bandwidth or the expertise perhaps to do that. How can I, as a member of the public, provide my input for just my area now that we have this grid map? How can I provide that to the commission?
Sure. So Mark or Brian, add to this if I misspeak on the technical side at all, but I think the key thing is you'll have to start from a grid, from a grid template, or later on from the draft map template. But it's fine to not feel like you have to redraw the whole map. If, as you said, the concern is just one community, the resident can simply redraw the districts around that community. Now you'll still have to population balance, so they'll have to deal with the ripples to the surrounding districts as well, and how to, as you achieve the goals for your community, what impact does that have on the neighboring communities? Consider that. But it's perfectly fine to say modify 2 districts or 4 or 5 and to leave the other 25 or 28 legislative districts untouched from the grid. And simply, send in a note saying, this was my, I was focused on achieving this goal. And it's always handy to submit public comment as well, because the idea that any one person is going to submit the perfect map and we'll all have an alleluia moment and we adopt map X is very unlikely. In all likelihood, as I talked about, there will be tons of changes and tons of input, and the final map will be an amalgam of lots of different maps. So it's always good for people to call out what are their key focus and key interests in the map they're submitting, even if they have taken the time to draw a statewide map. The city parallel I use a lot is people will spend 12 hours or 20 hours getting their neighborhood perfect in the perfect council district, and then they'll just population balance the rest of the city. And if they live on the east side, they've got a perfect district on the east side, and the west side, their districts are probably a mess. If they include a note saying, hey, I'm only concerned about this east side district, and then someone on the west side doesn't get upset. They say, oh, I'll start with your east side since I don't care about the east side, and I'll fix the west side, as opposed to showing up and saying, this map is trash. I live on the west side and it doesn't make any sense. So it's always good to include a note about what was the goal, what was the focus, and what were the key goals you wanted to achieve in this map, so that you as commissioners know what pieces are really their priority and what pieces you can pick from someone else's map and still achieve the first person's goals.
And can you submit those without the integrity checks? Because obviously the integrity checks won't work when you're submitting just a small portion versus the statewide. And having gone through trying to get that integrity check to work, it could take a while.
Yes, it is challenging. This is a complicated process. So I believe you do have to population balance both the district you want to draw and the neighboring districts. Brian, Kingery, or Mark?
You do, but there is leeway. There's that 10% target deviation. So if a citizen goes into the system and starts to, indicate their community of interest only, they'll have that leeway of 5% over or under the target population, the target total balanced population. Whereas the grid, it's really at 0.00, only one person difference. So if they're only interested in their community, they're not going to have to touch any of the districts like far away on the across the state. They'll submit a plan. They can add a comment saying, this plan, I've only focused on my community, which is located here, and then they're able to submit. And depending on what exactly has been changed, that allowable deviation of a total of 10% will make it a little bit easier to integrity check and then submit.
So just to follow up, because I want to make sure I'm understanding as part of it. But so if I'm doing, let's say Chandler, and then I have to do the surrounding districts, will it keep rippling out? Will I have to keep doing surrounding, or I can just do the one I'm focused on and then know that it's going to impact those bordering? But how many times do you have to do that border?
Well, this is a little bit different than the community of interest public input survey that we started out with talking about today. Whereas where a user could just draw their polygon of the community that they had in mind. That's a very simplistic way of being able to provide input. This is a bit more detailed, and only state plans are able to be submitted that pass those integrity checks. So if you're only wanting to provide local input, then you would just need to make sure that those ripples are balanced.
And one thought on that too, it's a good example to tie into what I was saying earlier is, let's say you're trying to draw Chandler together, and there's a district next to you that has part of Chandler and part of Gilbert. So you pull that other district's Chandler population, put Chandler together. Now you can take the remaining Gilbert district and just population balance it, and it can be a hideous mess. Maybe you had to give up some tribal territory or some Tempe territory, and so you're going to make this Gilbert thing that just wraps over. that's just an ugly seat, that's where you'd include a note saying, this is the Chandler seat I want. The Gilbert seat is a mess because I was simply population balancing to pass the integrity test. And so ignore that as a proposal. But that's how you can limit. So in that way, you would limit that ripple. So it's just the seat that you're changing and the seat that you're pulling population from, and minimize. And then that would leave you with the 28. You wouldn't have to mess with them. So don't feel like you have to get the ripple perfect. You just have to get the ripple to the point where it will pass the integrity test.
Doug, as part of your process, you've referred to the fact that the commission will direct you to make, change 1, change 2, change 187. Are those all little votes that we do? I mean, how do we direct you without voting? Or do we actually vote and say, go work on this community of interest, or go move this line from here to there? Just as a procedural thing, how does that go about?
Yeah, it's up to you whether you just do it through kind of a consensus approach or a formal vote. Obviously, adopting your draft map and your final map would be by a formal vote. But especially early on in those decision meetings, you may just want to give a list of, these are 10 things that I think you could do. Mapping team, can you go find a way to achieve all 10 of them? So it can be, as you're just kind of testing the waters early on, it'll probably be less formal. And then as you get closer and closer to what's starting to look like an official draft map, there will be tough choices without a doubt. And at that point, you may have to start taking formal votes to say, do we want to go this way or that way? Keep in mind that it's very likely that you may say, let's put, is there some way to put Chandler together? And we may come back with 2 maps saying, here's one way to do it, here's another way to do it. So you may be getting multiple maps back as you do those requests. So, and you may give us 2 instructions that we find we can come back to you with 1 map. So it'll be a fairly kind of informal dynamic process. And it's up to you whether you want to do it through consensus or through a formal votes.
Doug, when you say you come back with us with, options, is that real time, or what kind of time element are you talking about?
That's a good question. And it depends on the scale of the change. So, can we move 1,000 people from the Chandler seat to the Gilbert seat and flip 1,000 back the other way? That we could probably tell you live. It depends on the scale of the change. As to whether it's something we can quickly look at. I'm always a little nervous and a little cautious about doing things live in a meeting, because it's really easy when you're clicking to miss a block, and you hate to say, oh, that worked, and move on to 2 or 3 more changes and be like, oh, wait, we missed a block that had a 10-story apartment building and 2,000 people in it. So there's always, we always want to run those checks later on, and those checks can be slow. But to the best of our ability, we can give you input live, and obviously it's faster to get to a decision if we're able to draw a change for you right there live. But some of them will be big scale changes. Can we go from 3 border districts, legislative or congressional, to 2, or vice versa? That's a big change, involves lots and lots of ripples and lots of local community decisions that we would probably have to go away and come back to you with the map.
Where possible, I know it won't be always possible either, because we're going to be doing things a lot on the fly. But where possible, if we can get it in advance of the meeting, so we can actually take a look at the data that goes with the maps, to look at contiguity and compactness, those numbers that you've shown us how to do, competitiveness. Yep. It would be great when we can get those, if we can get them a day in advance to give us some time to review.
Definitely. Well, and I believe the plan is that the maps, as they come in and as we can process them, will be appearing on the hub. So it's not that you know, the community of interest maps, we kind of had to gather all the input and then run this giant process to do the beautiful report that Mark presented earlier. In this case, the maps will just be coming in and getting processed and posted to the hub. There's no analysis or summary that we have to do. So maps will actually be appearing live, and the public and the commissioners will see those as they're submitted. Not live as they're submitted. It's not that fast, but in a reasonable amount of time. We won't hold them all until your decision.
I just have another follow-up question on the complexity. So we've seen in the notes, people will have said, go to Dave's redistricting. I put up a great map there that works. This is what you should use. You know, this was before we all had our census data and so on, but we've seen quite a number of those. So people who've been playing around with this, can they upload their shape files or their files from one place to another? Can they move those? Since we have seen a number of comments about that.
Yeah, Brian, do you want to?
So throughout the editing process or the creation process of the plan, you are able to export your plan at that moment in time as a shapefile or a fixed text file. I believe the other one is HTML and a JPEG. And then you can do what you want with that exported data. If you find yourself working on 5 or 6 different versions of a plan, you can export each, and then on your website, you can post those files and say, use these or check these out. You could then go and publish them even further. So thinking of this as in an ArcGIS Online mentality, you can publish those exported shape files as feature services, and then be able to create your own interactive maps to allow people to explore very much in the same manner along the lines of everything that I've demoed. That grid map, all of that is on the ArcGIS platform. So you're able to get the word out that way. When input is provided specific to the plan that you've published, you could then make those changes and then re-import them back into the system to continue the process of successful submission.
So I'm hearing that people are able to do that. They're able to upload their materials.
Yes. And the key thing, though, is that they do need to to submit them to the commission, they do need to bring them back into this redistricting, import them back in and put them in. They can use those other tools, you know, if they're giving you a public statement, they can, you know, use those other tools to the degree they want, but to get into the process, the map does need to be brought into the redistricting system. If I should note, though, if someone does not have access to the system, you know, they lack a computer, that kind of thing, they can, you know, submit their map to you as a public comment, and the commission can then, you know, if that map is appealing and you want to see it, can then give direction to say, hey, can we get this drawn in? We won't draw in every public comment. As Brian and Mark talked about earlier, there's some subjectivity in anything we're trying to digitize from paper, and we do expect to get so many, but that'd be overwhelming. But all of those paper submissions also become fully part of your record and are available to the commissioners to then ask for them to be incorporated in as possible changes to the grid.
So I'm sorry, I have another question. One of the things you did, which I thought was great on the communities of interest, is you included something about whether people were submitting on behalf of an organization. And so we might have groups doing that. We might have tribes that submit and say, here's what we would like to see. Is there a way to add that in there again? Something that reflects that, so that if we have a city council from a community that submits something that would like to be identified, this is, you know, the city of Show Low, and this is what we would like. Is there a way to add something in there?
Yeah, as part of the metadata of the plan in the submission process, you do have additional fields where when you create the plan, it's literally just name and description. But you do also have additional fields when you're actually submitting it to say what organization you're with, any credits that you would want to provide, and a couple other additional fields.
Yep.
I have a very practical question, and it's really on behest of the commissioners. As we're, looking forward to this very monumental point of making decisions, what recommendations do you have in terms of specific preparedness? As conscientious deciders, we're looking at community of interest reports. There's robust data. We're looking at training with mapping and mastering the ability to maneuver, technologically different districts. With your experience and with just a matter of weeks, what's your guidance here? What should our eyes be focused on? Any particular advice?
It's a big question. There are lots of materials out there. You likely have seen some of them. MALDEF and I forget which group, one of the Asian American advocacy groups and the NAACP have a joint publication that's aimed at grassroots people. That's how to get involved in and influence redistricting processes. It's a fairly easy read. Like I said, it's aimed at grassroots folks, but it's something we distribute widely. The Brennan Center of New York has a similar kind of a little more complicated, denser read guide for residents to get involved in redistricting. And both of those, I know the Brennan Center, I think the MALDEF Coalition one also has a section on how to get heard by commissions. So it's also useful for commissioners to think about how to pay attention to the residents and pick out the key points they're making. The National Conference on State Legislatures also has a bunch of materials that might be of interest. Those are more aimed at legislators. So some of it will not be relevant to you, including sections on like how far they can go to protect the incumbents that would not at all apply to you. But some of it would. They also have useful like looks at compactness and those kinds of questions and what's a community of interest and what are the legal standards. And then obviously your legal team has done both a public, they did a very, very extensive public presentation on the criteria. They're also available. But ultimately it's, know the criteria of Prop 106, and listen to what you hear from the residents. We're seeing good signs. The community of interest phase was a very good sign that the residents are showing up. And hopefully that will just continue to expand into additional parts as we get into this. One key thing is once there are maps, actual maps, that tends to fire people up. Redistricting is this kind of, well, that doesn't affect me. Am I safe in my neighborhood today? Is my kid, fed at lunch today? It's a hard theory. But once they see maps, here's a map that divides my city. Here's a map that divides my neighborhood. That tends to fire even more people up. So hopefully we'll see more and more input as this process goes on.
I heard a premium on listening. Thank you. Other questions?
Well, I just have a follow-up question on, I'm looking at I've gone through training a couple of times already and still wanting to do some more. So I'm thinking complexity as part of my questions, really, because we want the input, like you say. A couple of things. Will there be a way for somebody, if they're not going to want to learn and dig deep into the system and try to figure that out. Is there a way to have a form online similar to communities of interest kind of idea, but not the same? I know that it's going to be complicated, and I'm not sure if this is possible, but where people could submit what they would like to see as their districts without having to learn the system. I know that may not be possible, but I'm asking because I think there are going to be a lot of folks who the system will be challenging and complex and may be intimidated by it, but we still would like to get some feedback.
Yeah, I think the community will continue to have the same ability to, submit a text comment online or to send in a letter that they already have. So certainly someone can just write, I'm part of, to use the example we've been using all day, I want the Kyrene area to be kept together. Writing that in is great. They can also look at the hub site and look at the maps. There's no login required for the hub site. So all everything will be available for people to look at it and do all that. The only thing you have to log in and get into complicated stuff is to draw a map. So people can look at the hub site, look at maps that get submitted and say, I like this one, I don't like that one because of this reason. So yes, there's definitely no requirement that you draw a map. People can simply comment on what are their goals. And then the commission has that in mind as you look at which maps before you achieve that goal. Or they can look at maps that other people have submitted and say, I like this one because of this, I don't like that one because of this. Those are certainly equally valid as any actually drawn map.
And Commissioner Lerner, I would argue that that data is so meaningful because this commission, we look at data that's beyond just the technological, summary that we're provided. I mean, our generation, we digest the narrative. And so if the community is concerned, we are reading and absorbing the qualitative narrative that you're providing us. So that is still incredibly important value data. Other questions of our mapping team? They've been very busy with a lot of substantive projects. And serving us well. It's very exciting with the community of interest report, the grid maps. I think we're in a great, strong starting point.
And
All right.
I will leave you with one final comment for the mapping report, and I don't want to steal Brian's thunder here, but he did make the grid map page public. So it is available out there for anybody to see right now.
And also download and be on their way with.
Yep. And we will be adding some PDF maps up there too if somebody wanted to download something on paper.
Yep, so we have just simple screenshots right now, but we'll have some high-res map books available, so poster size as well as that are statewide, as well as district specific, where you zoom in and you're able to see all the districts, the district lines at that level as well.
Yep.
And Doug, I want to thank you for this best practices presentation. It is really helpful. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, ditto. And thank you for all of the above. We look forward to the public's comments on the grid maps. Please remember it's an arbitrary starting point. If there is no further conversation, we will thank our mapping team and we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is Executive Director's report and discussion thereof. And I will turn it over to Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First up today, we have a update from our outreach team. So I'm going to hand it over to Marie and Alex for that.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. In our efforts to involve the public in the redistricting process, we reached out to the Arizona Library Association and the Arizona Library Archives and Public Records Department. We had hoped to have Dr. John Walsh, the president of the Arizona Library Association, on today, but it appears he was unable to join us. But between these two organizations, they have public library systems memberships that reach small and large communities in Arizona, so their reach is statewide. I believe there are about 235 individual libraries in the state. So they all have different levels of service. As I understand, some of them are just like one-person operation, and others like Phoenix have 17 branch libraries. So with their differing levels of resource and staff, we hope that at the very least that they would become knowledgeable of the process and be able to point their client to our website so they can access the information. And speaking of accessing the information, a number of these libraries have free Wi-Fi available to the public, and a number of them also do have public computers for them to use. So it's worth a call for the public to, or visit to their library to find out what's available to them so they can participate in the process. We did obtain a link to a map of free Wi-Fi in the state. So we'll be publishing that on our website, and it does have a Spanish page to it for people who are more proficient in that language. And I do also want to remind everybody that I went to the Arizona League of Cities and Towns on September 2nd to their expo. And there I met dozens of local mayors, town managers, council members, and staffers, and I handed them my card. And I just reminded them of the redistricting process and hope that they would contact us if they have any questions. And it was just another opportunity to get the local governments involved.
Thank you, Marie. In addition to what Marie said, and good morning, commissioners, I'm very excited, and I just wanted to thank the mapping team for putting all of the material and resources together on the mapping hub. I'm working right now to simplify that content so we can push it out to our partners and the communities of interest that we have been working with, so that they can have that material and an easy way to access it and submit public comment and maps for the commissions. Thank you, Marie.
All right. Thank you, Marie and Alex. Are there any questions for the outreach team before we move on to the budget update?
I think that's great. It's really nice to see that moving. I'm just curious about where we are with the social media aspect of it, in terms of some of the things that I think you were going to be working on.
Yeah, so we have been active on the social media platforms that we have live right now. Even right now, as I'm watching Twitter, it's great to see all of the interaction with the outside groups. So we are getting up to speed there. And then this week, we will be pushing out a social media toolkit that will incorporate how to utilize the mapping software, and also how to maneuver and go through the mapping hub that the mapping team put together for us. So that was a huge piece of the meat that we've been waiting for, but because it is public now, we can go ahead and push it out. So.
Well, can I just follow up with that? Can you, Alex, maybe just explain where you're using social media, how you're using that?
Yeah, so we are utilizing the platforms of Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube right now. We do have an Instagram platform, but that is still coming up to speed. And then with those platforms, we are pushing out the content with the communities of interest report and all the material that the mapping team is pushing out. And also, we are driving them to our website to submit public comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, one of the things that I find most attractive about social media is driving the excitement about our public hearings. Because at the end of the day, the substance of the material that we're using to form or shape our decision-making is what we're hearing from the public. And so everything and anything that you're doing to drive interest into attending and providing testimony at those public hearings, I think is a premium.
Right, if there's nothing else, I'll move on to the budget. Thank you, Marie and Alex. Let me just share one of my tabs really quickly. So we've spoke before about the budget and how we were allocated $7.9 million during the last legislative session. Those funds are non-lapsing. As I'm repeating myself again, but the commission does not know what challenges we're going to face. But we put together somewhat of a framework for the public and also to submit to the state. So here you see we have 6 full-time positions. Personal services are about $850,000. Employee-related expenses are about $375,000. With the professional and outside services, that's where we have set a lot of the funding aside in case we do need it in the future. Those include legal fees, court reporter fees, expert witnesses, mapping consultant fees, and accounting services. For travel, we have $500,000 set aside for in-state and $100,000 set aside out of state. I know that out of state might not necessarily make sense, but if there is litigation in the future and we have to travel, we set funds aside for that. And then other operating expenses are things like interpreters, meeting supplies, costs of doing business with ADOA and the AG. And then equipment is just our laptops, phones, and then other IT infrastructure we may need moving forward. And all of this, the budget submission can be found online at irc.az.gov/budget. And moving forward, I think we'll have a better sense of what we'll face or what resources we may need in the early part of the year. So we will, if there's a funding issue, address it with the legislature at that point. But that is where we are at with the budget. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. All right. I guess, Vice Chair.
Brian, what about the newsletters? I saw that it's going out, so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Michelle, would you like to tell them a little bit about the newsletters we're sending out weekly?
Yes, Brian, and thank you, Vice Chair Watchman. The weekly newsletters go out every Friday, usually in between 1 to 3 o'clock, and the newsletter has various components of it, and the newsletter is sent out to probably a little over 550 individuals, and that we get the names and the emails from individuals who sign up for our newsletter off of our website. And then also I take information from our community outreach specialists, the 2 of them, and I incorporate those email addresses as well too. So in addition to the newsletter, press releases go out to also community outreach, contact, and media, all of Arizona media, print and broadcast. So I do appreciate the commissioners taking the time to put their little in the spotlight. We felt that would be special, for our readership, so they can get to know our commissioners a little bit more outside of the professional realm. And your professional resumes are also listed within the newsletter as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Next up,
And,
we
and
have.
by the
oh, sorry.
way, excuse me, Director Schmidt, because we have so many weeks ahead of us in the spotlight, stay tuned for all of our staff members. So if you're curious about their backgrounds and their motivations, please read our newsletter. With that, Director Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next up, we have an update on our upcoming public hearing schedule. So I will turn it over to our Deputy Director, Lori.
Hi, good morning, commissioners. Here I'm presenting the final locations for the upcoming schedules regarding the grid map meetings. Okay, so we've selected the final meetings locations for the upcoming meetings regarding the grid map. We are posting those, we're sending those out in press releases, we're contacting the local areas, any of the groups that have been interested in the meetings. We're posting on social media, we have a whole communication plan. All of the locations were selected to accommodate the most amount of people possible while maintaining the ability to socially distance. There are several COVID restrictions in several of the venues that we would have wanted to schedule. And so because of the amazing attendance that we had at the last meeting or last listening tour, we really wanted for this next group of upcoming meetings, which are 5 meetings in Maricopa County and then several satellite locations. We wanted these meetings to accommodate the largest number of people possible. We really want public involvement, and at the Commission's direction, we understand that there will be future upcoming in-person public meetings, and we are looking forward to scheduling those meetings and having them in various locations throughout the state as well. Are there any questions?
I do. What I can't see the entire schedule. Yeah, October 7th. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
And we will be posting this, like I said, on all of our social media sites, on our website, and sending out press releases. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent overview of, the areas that we need to hear from in addition to the broad satellites, and also understanding that this is kind of the sweet spot, meaning that after the draft maps, we have a whole additional tour coming. And so when people are looking through the specific locations, times, dates of these hearings, please understand that this is, one step along the way, and there will be additional hearings coming. But thank you, staff. It's no simple task to coordinate that level of detail with staff, locations, all of the logistics, a lot of complications.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that is all the updates that we have for you today.
Any other questions from our staff? Okay, with that, we'll move to agenda item number 8, discussion of future agenda item requests. There was one item that we identified earlier in the meeting today, having to do with requesting a deeper dive into the majority minority districts of the Latino community, understanding the historic political history. Anything else or any other further comment on that item?
I just Commissioner York, Commissioner Newberg, I think that's a great idea. I support that.
Thank you.
And this is Commissioner Meal. We've had a number of really good presentations. And I just want to remind us all, once we hit mid-October, we're done with these kind of presentations. So anything anybody wants to try to get in, we need to try to get in before mid-October, because from then on, it's just pedal to the metal on all the detailed drafting.
And I agree with the recommendation on this presentation. I'm wondering whether, and I'm putting Roy maybe on the spot here, but I don't even know, but this can be part of the overall discussion. We can have something that ties in the Voting Rights Act with all of that as well. That presentation was real helpful on tribal communities and the Voting Rights Act. So whatever we do with the Latino community, maybe we can have something that ties that as part of it as well.
Yes, Commissioner Lerner, I think I'm happy to. I think the legal team is happy to present kind of a similar presentation with how the Latino community has sort of been treated under the Voting Rights Act, and maybe some sort of historical analysis of that, the kind of claims, for example, that Latino communities have made under the Voting Rights Act, and how courts have decided those cases. I think from a more political perspective, I see it kind of two different ways, right? There's the sort of legal VRA angle to this, but then also from a political history perspective, I do think that we could suggest some academics to present on that issue that could give the kind of information I think you're looking for.
This is Commissioner Meal. Roy, as part of that, I know with the population changes, we may face some real challenges on these minority majority districts. So if you can clarify, what do we need to hit to make those valid districts? What are the real requirements? Because I guess it's not necessarily a full majority of voting, but it's more complicated than that. So if you can, and that's going to be one of our first challenges, is really to make sure we're in conformance with that. So if you can help clarify that once again, I think you've already gone through some of it, but that would be helpful.
I can certainly do that, Commissioner Meal, provide that overview again. And of course, we have some updates now that we have real numbers, so I can talk about that.
Madam Chair, this is Vice Chair Watchman, maybe related, but we were talking about the 5 C's, the economic drivers, and that has a lot to do with the migration and movement of people. I don't know if we got to, but one thing that was missing was copper. Part of the 5 C's. We didn't talk about that, and then the tribal side, the gaming side. I don't know if Brian, we're gonna speak to that, but obviously because of demographic changes, it looks like a lot of our rural folks are maybe relocating to urban settings, and I think it's because of the change in the mining industry and maybe tribal gaming. So I'm not sure if we're gonna touch back on that, but to me, that's good information for the public to understand. That lends itself to what the Arizona demographer presented today. So hopefully it's on the agenda.
As we think through additional expert, presenters to come to us, I'd like to just remind us of the importance of establishing objective criteria through which to, entertain invitations, thinking about what are the top economic industries of Arizona, which is separate from the ethnic minorities, and whatever invitations that we offer, speak to a specific objective threshold of why we need to learn about this in order to redistrict. And I say that just so that after the fact, we feel good about providing an equal playing field for all industries, minority groups, communities of interest out there. And it's something that I think requires some thought and deliberation on. And we'll do due diligence as, you know, requests or these ideas come forward.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess to add to that, one area that's notable, I think, is just the significant tourism industry that we have here in the state. And so that's a big driver for many of our rural locations. And so I'd be curious about that too, because it all interplays. You know, we're talking about demographics, where people live, what drivers, and you know why we've seen such a big change in demographics from 2010 to 2020, and so I'm very curious on that. You know, the stuff on agriculture was nice, and so you know we had a great report on that, but you know we missed some marks which I think are relevant to my community and what I like to see. So,
and along those lines, that's actually what I'm getting at. And where is it that we establish that objective mark? There's so many economic industries in Arizona. There's the service industry within that hospitality. We have tourism. We have manufacturingism. We have high tech. We have aerospace and defense. We have renewable energy. We have vineyards. How is it, you know, I think maybe we opened up a can of worms when we looked into the 5 Cs. I know for me personally, I looked at it through the lens of what was economically uniting us and helping understand the historical context through which communities ended up, you know, migrating where they did. But I just want us to be cautious about, you know, what we're opening ourselves up to. What economic industries and where do we draw the line? And what minority group economic interests and where do we draw the line? My only request or comment on this is that if we're going to open this up further, that we have an objective, empirical basis through which we will evaluate the decisions. And we could put this on the agenda for next week because it's not a simple answer.
I agree with that, and I guess in my opinion, sometimes our population, especially you know in Phoenix and Tucson, have limited awareness of our rural Arizona, and so I think bringing to bear economic information to drivers will help all of us and the public, you know, as to you know who and what do we have here in this state, and so because we're all united, and you know, I'm not trying to bash you know the comment of the state of Maricopa. I want to get past that. I want to say the state of Arizona. Arizona is comprised of you know, Maricopa, Pima County, but also the great counties, including my area, Apache, Navajo, Copino County, and so you know those counties. You got Yuma. And you got the counties in Kingman, understanding that, so, you know, for the public to understand. So that at least we have, you know, more information on what's in our state. And so that's what I would think would be beneficial, you know, for us and our policies that we're going to be looking at. So a point of information, you know, because we talked about some of the information that has more relevance, you know, at least to Northern Arizona or the 5 Cs. And so I'm just looking at, you know, trying to balance what's being presented. I know that there's a long list of activity, but you know, the top 5, top 10, you know, would be very, very important, especially for our public, the ones that are listening in, so they understand the economic drivers, the demographic drivers, and all the people that reside in the state. So, thank you for the consideration, though, Madam Chair.
My sense is that maybe we need to add this as an agenda item just for us to do our due diligence to make sure that we're being equitable and thoughtful with groups that we're inviting to come in to speak to us, you know, or not. I think there's sensitivities around this, and if, you know, my fellow commissioners feel that this is something that they'd like to, you know, dive into a little more, we can certainly agendize this.
Well, it's a tough topic, Madam Chair, and so, you know, again, I you know, reiterate a couple more presentations on the economic drivers in the rural part of the state. I think is very, very important. That would bring to bear, at least help, in my opinion, you know, guide some of the changes that was presented earlier. And so, and then of course, you know, one of the 5 C's was copper. Mining is really, you know, changing. And so we have communities near Tucson that's, you know, the mining industry is probably gone. And then around, you know, Morenci and Globe and Miami, you know, those communities are now experiencing big changes. I was just reading today that maybe the Rio Tinto mine may not move forward. And so if that doesn't happen, you know, there's going to be some dramatic shifts. And so all that lends to migration changes and where our people live here in the state. And so, you know, just adding some more color to that, I think would be useful, at least for me, you know, because I don't have the opportunity to, you know, to delve into this information. So what's being presented has been very, very informational, very useful. And it's certainly enlightening me on how to move forward when we get to making decisions on the draft maps and the final maps. You know, all the information brings to bear on how I will make, you know, my decision along with my colleagues, including you. So,
okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm hearing a desire to do a deeper dive into some of the economic drivers, and just relating back to what we already spoke to, I'm hearing a desire to dive deeper into the unique historical political interests of the Latino community. Anything else as it relates to future agenda items? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for that valuable feedback. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 9, announcements. Do we have any other announcements besides what's going to go into our next agenda item number 10, which is our next meeting date? So our next meeting date will be next Tuesday, 8 a.m. for our regular business meeting on the 21st. And then we are also slated to have our public hearing in Mesa at 4 p.m. Please, everybody, look on the website for updated information about our public hearing schedule. Any other announcements from our staff or other commissioners? Okay, 9/10, our next meeting date. Number 11, closing of public comments. Please note, members of the commission may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date. With that, we move to agenda item number 12, adjournment. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Muir, I move we adjourn.
Vice Chair Watchman seconds.
So Commissioner Meal moves to adjourn, Vice Chair Watchman seconds. Any further discussion? We'll do a vote. Vice Chair Watchman,
Aye.
Commissioner Meal,
Aye.
Commissioner Lerner,
Aye.
Commissioner York,
Aye.
Commissioner Newberg is an aye. With that, we will adjourn, and I look forward to seeing our public and the team next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Have a great week, everybody, and thank you.